Alright, Stat Stars, up to this point we've been talking about how we can take sets of data and display it and analyze it and draw some conclusions from it. Now we're going to talk about where do we get the data? How do we collect it? And we're going to begin by learning how to distinguish statistical questions from other types of questions. In other words, you have to be able to ask the correct kind of question to get good data. We're going to identify what a population is in a sample in a statistical study, and we're going to learn what's the difference between an observational study and an experiment. Here's an example of a statistical study. Tommy and Hannah go off campus to eat lunch every day. Because the lunch period is short, they wonder if it'd be faster to order inside or use the drive-through. And so each day they flip a coin to determine which method, going inside or driving through, to use, and record the total length of time it takes from the moment they enter the parking lot to the moment they receive their food. They take several weeks of collecting data, they analyze the results, and they determine that ordering inside took about 2 minutes and 34 seconds less than using the drive-through on average. Their conclusion: it's faster to go inside. This is an example of a statistical question. What was the question they asked? Well, they wonder if it would be faster to order inside or use the drive-through. That's the statistical question. Tommy and Hannah's study went through the 4 steps of the statistical problem-solving process. First, ask the questions. Okay, you got to make sure that your question is focused and it is statistically appropriate. Then they collected the data, they flipped a coin and decided which way to go order their food, and they did it over several weeks. Then they analyzed the data, they measured how long it took each day, and they found out what the average was going through the drive-thru and what the average time was ordering in, and then they interpreted it, and based on their averages they figured out that it was quicker to order in than go through the drive-thru. Okay, now a statistical question is based on data that vary. Okay, it's got to change over time. The answer won't be the same each time an observation is recorded. So, here's an example. Is this a valid statistical question? How much money does Mr. Tagawa have in his wallet right now? Okay, this is not a valid statistical question. Why? Because right now he has a certain amount of money and that's not going to change. Now you could turn it into a valid statistical question by saying, how much money on average does Mr. Tagawa have in his wallet over a period of time, like over a week or over a month? That would be a valid statistical question because that amount of money he has in his wallet might change over time. But does the amount of money he has in his wallet change right now? No. Okay, is this a statistical question? How long can students at your school hold their breath on average? Yes, because that's going to vary from student to student. Athletes may be able to hold it longer than someone who's not an athlete. But the point is, it's going to change from person to person. So that is a statistical question. What proportion of U.S. adults engage in vigorous exercise at least once a week? Is that a statistical question? Yes, it is, because that's going to vary from person to person as you pull them in from your sample. So anything that varies over time or that varies between persons or whatever objects you're studying, that's going to be a statistically valid question. Now let's say we were interested in finding out what percent of 16 to 20-year-olds in the United States text while they drive. That's a pretty statistically significant question because it's going to change from person to person, right? Hopefully nobody texts while they drive, but we know that does happen. Okay, so how are we going to figure that out? Well, ideally we would survey every single 16 to 20-year-old in the United States. Obviously that's not feasible. It'd be prohibitively expensive and it would take forever. So what do? We pick a sample of 16 to 20-year-olds living in the United States, a subset of the population. So the population is the entire group of individuals we want information about. In this case, it would be all 16 to 20-year-olds in the United States. A census collects data from every individual in the population. The United States conducts a census every 10 years. 2020 was a census year. Theoretically, it gets information about every person living in the United States. In actuality, it doesn't, but it gets pretty close. A sample is a subset of individuals in the population from which we want to collect data. And it's up to the statistician to determine what a good size of the sample would be, and we're going to learn about that in a later lesson. Okay, so in this example, let's identify the population and sample in each of the following settings. The first setting is a wildlife biology in Alaska tranquilizes 42 grizzly bears in the state, records their weights, and then releases them. So the population is all grizzlies in Alaska. The sample is 42 bears that the wildlife biologist tranquilizes. It's a subset of all the grizzlies in Alaska. Okay, how about this example? Which is the population, which is the sample? A fan selects 15 Beyonce songs and counts the number of words in each song. Okay. The population is all Beyonce songs. The sample is the 15 chosen by the fan. Okay, here's an easy mistake to make. A sample is the individuals that data are collected from, not the number of people selected. So let's say you wanted to survey all voters in Nashville, Tennessee, and you decided to sample 100 people from that population, but you only got 20 people to respond to your survey. The sample is not the 100 people you wanted to talk to, it's the 20 people you actually talked to. Okay, and then finally there are two different ways of getting data. One is from observational studies and the other is from experiments. So with an observational study, you're just getting information from the population without bothering them or asking them to do anything unusual. You're just observing them. Okay? In experiments, you're actually imposing a treatment on the individuals. Okay? So experiments might be something like, does aspirin reduce the chance of a heart attack? So you'd have one group that doesn't take aspirin and one group that does, and after a certain amount of time you'd see if it had an effect on the heart attack rate. And that taking the aspirin would be the treatment. Okay, another experiment, do plants grow better when classical music is playing? You could have one group of plants with no music, you could have another group of plants with classical music playing. The treatment is playing the classical music. And then you compare the results after a certain amount of time. So experiments impose treatments on the subjects, and the observational studies just get data by looking at them or observing them. So here's the definition. Observational study observes individuals and measures variables of interest, but does not attempt to influence the responses. And an experiment deliberately imposes treatments, we call those conditions, on individuals to measure their responses. All right, let's look at this situation and decide if it is an observational study or an experiment. 64-year-old children are randomly divided into three groups. One group was shown a fast-paced cartoon, one group was shown an educational cartoon, and one group was given art supplies and instructed to draw pictures. Afterward, the 4-year-olds who watched the fast-paced cartoon scored significantly worse than the other two groups on tests that measured the ability to make decisions. Okay, this is an experiment. Okay, you're providing three different treatments to three different groups. One group gets treated to a fast-paced cartoon, the other group gets treated to an educational cartoon, and the third group's treatment is given art supplies and told to draw pictures. So you are actively imposing treatments on the group. So it is an experiment. All right, let's look at this situation. 100 teenagers between the ages of 16 to 18 were surveyed. The teens were asked whether as young children they watched fast-paced cartoons more often than, less often than, or about equally as often as educational cartoons. Then they were asked to reveal their GPA. The The teens who watched fast-paced cartoons more often than educational cartoons had lower GPAs than teens from the other two groups on average. This is an observational study. There is no treatment being imposed. You're just gathering data from their behavior. You aren't changing their behavior or asking them to do something unusual. You're just asking what was their normal behavior, and then you ask them for their GPA. That you're just observing. So there's no experiment involved there.